All right, so Martin, Bill, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Zoltan. Thanks for having us back. Sadly, we've lost our quarterback, Mr. Jeremy Kleiman, today for emergency reasons. Let me assure you that Jeremy and his family are okay. Jeremy just needs to attend to a few matters. Always a pleasure. We'll do some of the freestyling that I have already alluded to and do our best together with one of my dearest friends, Mr. Bill Pasquale III. We'll try to bring you up to speed with the latest developments in the US market. Because I can't resist that temptation, before we do that, Zoltan's really sent me down the memory lane because he talked about a panel out in Eastern Europe some 10 years ago. And I just realized that today I'm sat in my New York City office. And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm just saying it that to show how times can change throughout the years, and that we definitely, to Katja's point, I believe it was, just we all have to work really hard, but let's have fun as well. So I hope to wrap up this introduction that you'll have a lot of fun with Bill and me, and perhaps, because we've lost Jeremy as our moderator, my first question to Bill, and Bill, shall we play a bit of a ping pong? So I'll ask you a question, you'll ask me a question. We've done this before. So what's your take on the latest developments in the arena of sports betting regulation? Because quite frankly, without stealing your thunder, there's not that much to talk about this year, is there? You're on mute.
Martin, always a pleasure. Zoltan, thank you for having us. I mean, there's always something to talk about, but in years past where we're having dozens of states come on board, 2023 was one of the biggest impactful states because we had, over a dozen states come online. This year, it's only been North Carolina on the sports side, and obviously Rhode Island on the iGaming side, the 7th state to do iGaming in America. North Carolina had a great launch in March. It's doing well. It's scaling. It's been, a good start going into now the 3rd month. There are very few opportunities because, as you know, Martin, legislative sessions are coming to a close. The two sort of what we'll say trophy states, the brass rings, if you will, California, which is the 8th largest economy and the most populous state, in Texas are not going to happen this year. Texas, just because of the legislative calendar, they meet every other year. So there was no chance for Texas to go this year. And then thankfully and mercifully, the yet again failed attempt to put another ballot question on the California ballot failed because the tribes jumped on it. We've talked about this so many times, the $600 million campaign to bring sports betting to California. Not only did it fail, but it failed miserably, garnering only 18% of the vote. I think some of the more likely states, which we can talk about, sort of, that are in the queue, I believe, are states like Oklahoma, Missouri, I think have really good opportunity. I also think Minnesota has a wonderful opportunity. Georgia, unfortunately, has moved on. Governor Brian Kemp is supportive of it, but the legislature wasn't able to get it across the goal line. And you know what? I mean, that only benefits two channels. It benefits the black market and it benefits the surrounding states. So fortunately, there's other states like Alabama, which are more of a far reach, but there's not many. What do we have? Like maybe 8 states to go. More than 2/3 of the country have legalized sports betting of some form, both retail and online.
And I believe that's exactly the point. I will not name any names, but there's a colleague of mine, another dear friend at Entain, was in a different context relating to Europe. But once we'd gotten some 15 European jurisdictions done and we had to move on to tackle the remaining ones, his famous line rang, well, we've done the easy ones, if you will, so we've only got the difficult ones to contest. And I agree with what Bill has just said, that some north of 30 states had by now regulated mobile, or if you will, online internet forms of gambling. Even more have done internet or retail. So there are not that many states left. Of course, what is slightly upsetting, including on the pure business side of things, is the fact, going back to another point Bill has just made, that California and Texas are yet to regulate. Indeed, in Texas, it's a bit of a quirk in the legislative system, so we'll have another chance. Next year, we've discussed this matter at this forum before. It's been clear throughout that the Texas-based sports franchises, just like in most, if not all other places, are supportive of legislation. We just need to, I suppose, bring the Texas Lieutenant Governor with us, who's always been the one who called the shots on this. Regarding California, it's a matter of finding a way to have an efficient and productive debate with the tribes, because nationwide, the tribes have, if you will, and for want of better expression, scored a few victories lately, including on the federal level. So quite a few of them, I would suspect, might be looking at the developments in Florida with a keen eye, asking themselves the question whether that's something, I'm sure that that's something they may want to, but could they replicate it? So that will need to be factored in. And when it comes to the other states that Bill has mentioned, in misery, I think the misery, if you pardon the pun, is the fact that rather annoyingly for me, I suppose for Bill as well, the Chiefs keep winning the Super Bowl. So the good old Missourians might be quite jealous of their neighbors across the border in Kansas. And of course, Kansas City sits right at the border, that in Kansas, they are allowed to bet on their beloved Chiefs, whereas in Missouri, not yet. So all jokes aside, that genuinely may be part of the motivation. And then we've got the likes of the Southern Belt, where religious considerations, I suppose, other cultural idiosyncrasies are coming into play. Plus, there are practical issues, like, for example, and as a European, originally, I'm still learning about all this. To give you but one example, the Georgian legislative session, or the legislative session in Georgia, not to confound it with the state of Georgia, out in the Republic of Georgia, out in Europe, is extremely short. So those poor sods have a very, very brief window of opportunity to get it done, and they tend to be up against rather stiff resistance and opposition from certain quarters. They're supposed to move on to iGaming, as Bell's already pointed out, like snowball's chance in hell, very sadly, that any additional state will have regulated iGaming, or if you will, online poker and casino this year, which to my mind begs the question why that is. Now, here in New York, I suppose it comes down to Governor Hochul and her staff and the New York State Gaming Commission focusing on the downstate casinos, or in human speak, most likely New York City casinos. But clearly, Bill, there are bound to be other reasons. So do you think that it's still the case that, unlike sports betting, online casino doesn't have as powerful a narrative behind it? And if you agree with that premise, what would we need to do to change that? Should we take stock of what has been done? Because a lot of efforts have been invested. And in the run-up to the next year's legislative sessions, figure out whether we need to change tack, or whether we need to bake in additional arguments, or what other paths we could take to finally get more than those 7 or 8 states regulated on the iGaming side of things. So what would be your take?
First of all, there's only 8 states, Missouri, Oklahoma, Minnesota, Alabama, South Carolina, Georgia, California, and Texas that haven't legalized sports betting. And I think some of those states will eventually move. A lot of them, which hinge on Southern conservative votes, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who's the head of the Senate and the Lieutenant Governor of Texas, 2 sessions in a row in 21 and 23, was willing to move forward. But if the votes aren't there, you don't want to put a vote up and it fail, because you not only need 2/3 votes, the House has passed it twice, but you also need to put it on the ballot. So if they were to get it done in the session next year in Texas, which would be great, they would then have to put it on a ballot in November. So the earliest they could launch would be 2026. The good news was last year, Florida launched. So that's the 3rd largest state in the nation. To get to your conversation about iGaming, if you go back 10, 11 years ago when Jersey launched and then Delaware and Nevada with poker only, I would have thought by now we would have had 20 some odd states. But without being too critical, and I won't single anyone out, the industry bears a large responsibility for not being able to come together and make a powerful argument. I think we have a very strong case to make. Jobs, customer protection, responsible gaming, and the fact that there is such a huge amount of black market gambling online, that the only way to penetrate it is to legalize it and then be able to monitor what goes on to protect the player, and then also incentivize the operators to give information on how to best attack the black market, the Bovados and the Bodogs of the world, which are continuing to do quite well. Rhode Island launching this year, they had a successful launch. Is a bit of a small state. It's like the size of a county in most states, like New Jersey or New York. New York last year wanted to push iGaming. Senator Adabo, who and Assemblyman Pretlow have bills pending again this year. But unfortunately, there are certain things in New York's culture of politics. Governor Hochul is not against it, but there's only so much oxygen in the political room. Last year, it was the $440 million to upgrade Belmont, which is a great racetrack owned by NYRA. So NYRA was focused on that. A lot of the legislature and the governor was focused on that. Now, coming into this year, it's, as Martin has said, the 3 downstate casinos. In the south of the state, the New York metropolitan area, if you will, there's going to be 3 casinos awarded. They were supposed to be site selections done last year. It doesn't even look like they'll be able to get it done this year, although I'm hopeful. But a lot of people think that's just an excuse. But I think what the industry needs to do a better job of, and there are the folks like Howard Glazer, who's been leading a charge for Light and Wonder to try to push it across the top. The number of jobs that have been created in the sister state of New Jersey to New York to date is 6,842 jobs. And a lot of those jobs are related to live dealer experiences. And so, every day that goes by that New York doesn't pass it, who benefits? The black market and the bordering states of Connecticut, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. So, I am not optimistic about much happening this year, although it's always nice to get surprised. The other state that I put at the top of the heap, possibly for next year, is Illinois. The regulators really want it. It seems like the administration, the governor's office wants it, and they just have to get it across the goal line. But, what happens, Martin, is a lot of the operators feel like their government relations folks can just go in, and they tend to talk about distractions about anti-competitive issues, which are really not helpful. That's why creating more of an industry message is very helpful. And why I am hopeful that we'll be able to come together and make 2025 the year of iGaming.
Fingers crossed. I suppose Illinois is a great example, because I'm sure a lot of folks here will be aware of the fact that the governor, and it's a legislature-led state. So the governor, I'm oversimplifying, but effectively the Illinois governor pretty much only has the power to make a proposal for the legislature, for the assembly to consider, but the governor put forth a proposal whereby the tax rate applicable to sports betting would go up significantly. So that, and let's see if that formula could be replicated in other states, that could be a trade-off here. Leave our sports betting tax rates alone and regulate the other product vertical if what you're after, to Bill's point, is A, sustainable tax revenue from a widened market, plus high consumer protection standards that will ultimately help drive out the black market, and also by implication to make it circular and go back to government costs and expenditure, alleviate the pressure on the health system, because the license operators, they do care for their customers and they do provide them with responsible gambling tools. So we're clearly getting slightly more granular, but I suppose before we go even deeper down that route, the only other point I would add to what Bill has already said, and I suppose we might have a strong tendency to forget about that, because sadly the Trump-related stories suck all the oxygen out of the room. So yes, there's a presidential election this year, but there also will be quite a few governor's races. There's the Congress election as well. So that all this has had and will have had, at least in my opinion, a bearing on the priorities of the individual state. In other words, and perhaps in human speak, some of them may be inclined to shy away from doing in the super election year something that may be perceived as rather controversial, i.e., I would disagree, but some folks perceive it like that, regulating iGaming. So there will be some kind of calculus behind it, or a strategy. Oh, can I really score many brownie points here? Will this really get me many votes? And the answer might be no, but the smarter amongst the decision makers, and there are plenty of them out there, needless to say, if and when they get re-elected, to Bill's other point, 25 and beyond, 26, 27, and well, 28 will be the same super election story. That may be an opportunity to get things done. I suppose going back to, if I may, my point about granularity, I'm sure a lot of you would have followed all the issues related to the likes of proposition bets in connection with college sports markets and some of the sports integrity issues that have befallen the industry. So my next question, and this is true freestyling, we haven't really rehearsed it, but I'm sure Bill will have the answers as usual. So my next question, Bill, if I may, relates to Charlie Baker's. So Charlie Baker, for arguably very few, if anyone here, but Charlie Baker happens to preside the National Collegiate Athletics Association at the moment, the former governor of Massachusetts, of course, my spiritual sporting home. What's your take, Bill, on Charlie Baker's efforts to not stamp out proposition bets in college sports, then severely restrict them? And what has been the reaction of the states that have already considered his proposal?
Yeah, well, former Governor Charlie Baker, who's a really smart man, I think he felt he was pushed into a corner with the likes of some of the integrity scandals facing collegiate basketball. and professional leagues. But I think it's much like Martin, what we've gone through with Congressman Tonko's bill. Congressman Tonko hails from upstate New York, represents the Saratoga area where the racetrack is. He's a mental health leader, concerned about mental health, and he dropped a bill last year to ban advertising in sports. Martin and I were one of the few that respected him and went and met with him. And then I debated him in Saratoga in August of last year, and he's now pulled back on that bill and has announced just a few short weeks ago he's going to introduce another bill, which I think will be more acceptable, but yet I don't think the industry will accept it, and I don't fault them. I think Charlie Baker's announcement has shaken the political system. We now have multiple states who've come across and already banned prop bets. And I'm really not thrilled about the industry's reaction to it. I am a part of the industry, so I'll take my own responsibility. But, you know, it needs a sit down to explain to Governor Baker, look, all you're doing is driving market share to the black market. And if you think prop bet bans is going to help with integrity or with responsible gaming, you're wrong, because we're going to drive more folks to the black market, and we're not even going to understand what's going on, because, you know, you tend to have better data and better integrity when you've legalized and regulated it. I know the story about Ohtani, and that was black market. That was discovered through the federal government and bank fraud. But, you know, the prop bet ban bill or proposal to ban prop bets, which a couple of states have done already, is really disturbing, because all it hurts are the vulnerable and the sports betting operators who have spent zillions of dollars on getting licensed. And it benefits the black market. So, I mean, why that message hasn't gone out there a little bit stronger, I think we need to get ahead of it. As we creep into the summer, where we're going to have the 2 national conventions, that'll be where the attention is. Most of the legislatures will be on break anyway. So I think we need to spend May to December vociferously advocating for this terrible idea. The best of intentions sometimes do not result in really good policy. The pathway to hell is paved by good intentions oftentimes.
Yeah, absolutely. If I may, in a similar vein, because Bill's touched upon the betting scandals outside of NCAA's precinct that have befallen the leagues. So first of all, I would fully concur with the view, because sadly there are folks out there who would beg to differ and, in my opinion, rather erroneously believe that the regulation is the root cause of these scandals. Well, actually, in my personal opinion, the fact that the markets have been or are being regulated have gone a long way towards preventing a lot of these scandals from even happening. And if that's not possible, may not always be watertight. Believe you me, we all have very robust systems in place. Then these scandals have been on the back of the regulation detected and are being addressed. And what I've also found very compelling is the reaction of the leagues. If you look at the NHL, and great for him, Shane Pinto, well, they're out of the playoffs, so they haven't even qualified, but he's come back. He's playing yet again, so fingers crossed. He's learned his lesson. It's great to see him back on the ice rink, but on the back of his rather ill-considerate betting activities, he faced 42, so half a season, or rather 41 would be half a season ban by the NHL. So he had to sit it out. And even more prominently, John Day Parker, the guy who, again, in my opinion, committed the ultimate mortal sin here, he's someone who bet against his own team. So effectively, he sought to throw the game. So he's totally compromised its integrity. He's been banned from the NBA for life. So that's why I'm saying that I found the reaction of the leagues very compelling, and it's actually great to have them on board when it comes to regulation, and then of course ultimately also the commercial side of things, because and that's a message that I'd like to convey, perhaps at the risk of stating the very obvious. We do need to continue working across the spectrum. We need to continue collaborating. The industry, the customers, the legislators, the regulators, the leagues, the suppliers, everybody involved, and that way kicking it back to Bell, because you've made, as usual, a very good point about the still persistent or still existing black market. And I believe the most efficient way of driving those operators out, besides asking some of the national papers to stop giving shout outs and any room to the likes of Bovada and Boda, but then I'm saying that semi-jokingly, is to come together and continue propounding efficient and effective regulatory schemes. Because then once everybody's in it, of course, commercially speaking, and that's fair enough, this is the way of this world, we all might be at each other's throats, or rather our commercial colleagues need to make money to keep the wheels spinning. But when it comes to these fundamental pillars or principles that underpin the regulated markets, we do need to work together, be it in relation to responsible gambling, sports integrity, anti-money laundering, and so on and so forth, with a view to making the regulated markets, and that's the final point, as robust as possible from the regulator and sustainability perspective, while allowing the market participants to be creative, innovative, and ultimately offer the most entertaining, most attractive, and safest product possible. So that would be the end of this part of my sermon. I suppose, shall we perhaps move on to briefly talk about responsible gambling, if you will, or do you want to carry on down the path of talking about the black market a little bit more? Because that, in my view, is the absolutely critical issue that needs to be addressed. And when or as it is being addressed, then we can build up on it. And in parallel, it'd be good to be deploying all the other protective measures. But in my book, both from the sustainability and the pure economic perspective, the black market operators are the main threat, and they're the ones that siphon up revenue for regulated markets, even regardless of their individual setup.
Well, the problem, I remember having a conversation with a legislator in leadership in a southern state a couple of years ago, and trying to explain, and it's just amazing that the industry hasn't done a better job educating. And then we can pivot to RG. You know, what operators go through, and I'm you know, everybody thinks all the tier one operators are just making massive amounts of money, okay? And that's not the case. What they have to do to get into a legalized, regulated market, AML requirements are extremely expensive. Compliance, licensing, geolocationing, none of these issues the black market has to deal with. You know, each operator is paying geolocation companies bets per click. That's the technology, that's what it costs. But those are millions of dollars just to be able to operate. Now, a substantial part of their business, proposition bets, which is quite profitable in comparison to regular, you know, in-game bets or single game bets, is frustrating because you're only hurting taxes vulnerable customers and the legal operators. And there needs to be a whole shift in the debate about black market versus the legal regulated market. And that case has not been made in a great way. That legislator was educated to a bit, and he agreed he didn't understand that. Most folks and most politicians think, oh, you just go on your phone, you click, you put a bet in, there's nothing behind it because it's all virtual. They don't understand the massive costs that go into this in terms of paying people to do the jobs that we just mentioned. The other piece of that is, banning prop bets will have a deleterious effect on responsible gaming, in addition to all the other things we said. And I still believe, and thanks to you, Martin, we're able to get the message out that the most seminal issue for the industry, wherever you stand in the supply chain, whether you're an operator, an affiliate, a payment processing company, a geolocation company, an ML company, a consultant, what have you, a bank, you should be extraordinarily engaged on RG. It's not about just churning and like checking a box so you have an RG 800 number on your website or whatever the regulators require. It's about getting ahead of the curve and learning the lessons of Scandinavia and Germany and the UK and what they've done, because that could be coming here soon. And that won't be good for competition. It won't be good for technology. And it certainly won't be good for consumer protection.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've all seen lately an advent of additional responsible gambling focus outfits, be it Roga, the association that the leading US sports books have formed, or the RGAA, the one launched by the affiliates. So certainly, to Bell's point, RG is gaining prominence, and I would suggest that we still have enough time to address the potential challenges and challenges at this forum. We talked before about some of those groups that have landed on US shores and are trying to act, if not against the industry, then against the existing format of regulation. So I would suggest that the answer to that, besides, of course, reaching out to everybody, ultimately, it's always worth having a conversation, even if one ends up agreeing to disagree, is to have a strategic thing about how consumer protection is being approached. Don't get me wrong, a lot has already been done and is being done, and strong programs are in place. But I suppose what I'm trying to say is that we might need to bake in what's happening outside of, for want of better expression, outside of our bubble, and bake in the fact that not everybody these days might be agreeable to, no matter how foolish we may think that is, might not be agreeable to the idea that this sector does need to be regulated in the way it is being regulated. So in other words, and that applies well beyond consumer protection, all this is a work in progress, but I suppose that would be the final point here, because I suspect, unless Zoltan tells me otherwise, we're hitting the home straight. We might be like 3-minute warning, is it, Zoltan? We're sticking to 11 a.m. Eastern to wrap it up. But the point I was going to make, to link it back to the debate that we've had here about iGaming regulation, there are lots of, at least a handful of legislators out there who would strongly argue that iGaming is prone to the risks of gambling addiction. So it's not just a practical issue. It's not just a regulatory issue, it's also a political issue. So what I'm really trying to say is that it's just all intertwined, and the more we can do to talk, or if you will, shout from the rooftops about the work, the good work the industry has already done. I would hate to be naive here, but the more hearts and minds we can win here. Not this year, as we've discussed, but 25 will be another opportunity. It's not a super election year. I might now be sounding like a broken record, so I suppose I'll kick it back to Bell for a few final thoughts about anything we've talked about today, or the usual crystal ball glazing exercise in the run up to the next. We'll be sitting here, I presume, 3-4 months time from now, because it will be the summer. A lot of us will be on vacation, including legislators and regulators who happen to be human beings as well. I'm saying it in the nicest possible way. So not that much might happen, but what would be, that's the question, Bill, what in your view would be the best use of that rather lull period in the run up to Danville? The winter festivities, but even more importantly, the next legislative season next year. What do we need to do to make the most of 25?
So first of all, next year, there's only 2 elections of any consequence. New Jersey and Virginia have gubernatorial elections always the year after a presidential. So that's the time to move. Nothing's going to happen, well, nor does anything need to happen in New Jersey. Virginia, which is, doing quite well, would be a good place to start to discuss in 26 iGaming. It's not going to happen next year in the middle of a governor's race. I mean, I think the most seminal factor for next year's ability to move forward on either sport or iGaming will be the presidential election. A lot of people aren't thrilled about the 2 choices, but those are the choices you're going to have. And everybody thinks that it's god awful. I hear this every 4 years. People don't like the candidates. Well, those are the candidates you have. If you don't like it, why don't you run? If Biden is reelected, there's a better chance that things will move forward in the industry. If Trump is elected, I believe it will be a disruptor to the industry, and there will be continued chaos, as was the case in his first term. And that's just not just my political opinion. That's been proof. He's not a supporter of some of the things we're working on. What the industry needs to do in the next 8 to 10 months, or 8 to 9 months, is to get ahead of the curve, come together, start to work collaboratively, get the messaging out, because I believe there's a good, strong message for both the states that remain for sports betting, those 8 states we mentioned earlier, and there's even a more powerful case to be made about the 43 states that haven't come across legalizing and regulating online casino and poker. I mean, Jersey's creating jobs, as is Michigan and West Virginia and Connecticut, Rhode Island, all the states that have done it so far. Jersey's exploding with live dealer. It's a new offering. I'm in the middle of a negotiation right now with a new massive studio that's going to employ several hundred people. That's all positive. But then you have this other thing that's creeping and starting to gain traction, which is states, like you mentioned earlier, Illinois, New Jersey just dropped a bill to, almost triple the tax rate on sport. Those are all really bad policy moves, but the industry hasn't done a really good job of getting ahead of them, right? They kind of, they're either hiding in the shadows or don't know how to act. Operators are really good at operating. They haven't been very good at GR, which is an important tool to gaining a more responsible regulatory structure. So I am hopeful that the remainder of this year, and soon, not later, will be spent on as you and I do, Martin, attending those events where legislators and regulators tend to come to, and also outwardly reaching out, going into home turf to discuss. You and I had a really good conversation. We won't get into the details of it with the co-chair of the Congressional Gaming Caucus, Congresswoman Titus. Boy, is she smart and educated and ahead of the curve. Nobody's utilizing her, and she's well respected. And I guess the final point will be, the Blumenthal excise tax issue, and some of the other sort of difficult challenges that are occurring in Congress might become more difficult should Congress change hands in the fall. That's certainly in the lineup. So, I mean, I guess we're approaching the end because Zoltan did text me. Martin gave us an extra few minutes. I really appreciate doing this with you. I appreciate Zoltan having us. And I'm hoping we provided some benefit to the viewers and listeners. But I think 2025 is going to be a much better year, only if we use the remainder of 24 to get out in front and run a true responsible campaign to educate the policymakers.
Conscious of time as well, let me also express my gratitude. Thanks for having me back. Thanks for the chat. Bill, rhetorical question to you. Why don't you run? I'm sure that when Natalie, our younger one, turns 21 in 20 years from now, she'll definitely be an American vote for you. And on that note, back to you, Zoltan. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Martin. Yeah, Bill, why don't you run? It's much more complicated than it's much more complicated than that. Thank you guys again for this great update as usual. I hope you enjoy your time at the SBC conference. Say hello to Rasmus and the team from my side. And Bill, we see each other in Estonia in June, in Tallinn.
Yeah, we'll touch base next week. Yoni, good to see you, mate. Have a good one.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.